Hi YouTube. It's time again for another episode of Ask Sister Pfister, where you ask the questions and I attempt to answer them. So, a small reminder to my viewers that I am not a psychologist or a qualified professional of any kind. I am just a former Jehovah's Witness who has been around the block a few times, and this is my small way of letting others learn from my experience. So, also, it's kind of fun. We have several really good questions for this episode, and the first one comes to us from Elaine Kelly, who says, I am not, nor have I ever been a witness, but my 2 grandchildren are being raised in the cult. My daughter lives with me and the 2 kids, but they attend the congregation with their father and his parents. The boy just turned 7. Too bad I can't wish him a happy birthday. I'm sorry, that sucks. I did have a small party for the girl when she was 4. She loved it, because of course she did. Birthdays are awesome. I later received a text from the dad telling me I'm a snake, because that's how they roll. Oh well, better a snake than a expletive pedophile. I could not agree more. My daughter does not practice the religion anymore, but she still supports the children being raised this way. It's a constant bone of contention between us, and we fight a lot about it. She has filed for divorce and will hopefully get full custody. So here's my question. How do I get my grandkids out of this? Wow, that's a tough one. But I will say, in my opinion, you are actually pretty well situated here. The first thing I would recommend is to keep doing what you're doing. You have to counteract the love bombing that these kids get on a regular basis with your own variety of unconditional grandma love, which is the best kind. You need to give those kids as much time and attention and love as you possibly can. Let them celebrate with you. Be there for them. Ask them questions. Show them that you can be trusted. Be this window to the real world for them, because they're going to clearly see for themselves that what they're being taught is not true. But try not to say anything directly critical of the Jehovah's Witnesses to them, because they are being programmed to believe that apostates and opposers are evil. You also don't want them going back to their dad and saying, Grandma says the Jehovah's Witnesses are bad, or whatever, because this could cause bigger problems for you later, obviously. So, the second thing that I would recommend is for you to work on your daughter. The fact that she has the kids and they live with you right now is very positive. But do you know if she still believes? Because it sounds like she might still be mentally in. And if so, I would see if you could get her into some kind of counseling, if she would be open to it at all. She needs it. If you haven't already, try to very gently open her eyes to the full scope of the pedophile problem within the congregations using public record, mainstream news articles, and any other reputable source that you can find. Try to remain calm about it. I know that it's very upsetting and it's hard, but you just have to repeat your core message, which in my opinion should be, I'm telling you all of this because I love you and I love those kids and I don't want to see anyone get hurt. And that, or variations of that, is what you need to keep repeating. Also, I would recommend that you try to learn a little bit of their vocabulary and be aware of how she might perceive certain words and phrases as meaning something different than what you intend, because they do have a pretty weird language. You might have already noticed that. And above all, understand that this is very difficult for her and for the kids as well. The other recommendation that I have is to try to make sure that her divorce attorney and eventually the judge is aware of the issues that surround witnesses and small children and what theocratic warfare is. If you don't know, theocratic warfare is the idea that witnesses can lie to authorities if they think that they're protecting their religion. It is a very common tactic with child custody cases, especially if they suspect that the unbelieving parent is going to try to keep the kids out of the Kingdom Hall. But again, you have to choose your words very, very carefully. The witnesses are very adept at appearing reasonable and stable and making the other side look bad. Usually by saying horrible and hurtful things to you and provoking you until you completely lose your shit, and then saying, oh, look how unstable and wicked this person is. Now, your daughter has to know this on some level, and she probably has valid concerns that if she does say something about not wanting the kids being raised a witness, her ex is going to come after her, and he's going to have the full weight of the Watchtower Society behind him. And that's scary, they will come after her. They will assassinate her character. They will accuse her of all kinds of awful things, including drugs and alcoholism and promiscuity and insanity. It doesn't matter if none of that stuff is true. They will say it anyway because they're going to say whatever they need to say to win. This is where I'm going to ask my viewers to help out. So if you can, post links in the comments for Elaine of reputable source documents and articles that she can use to show her daughter and hopefully her daughter's attorney about all of these issues. Now, the worst case scenario for you, Elaine, is if you can't convince your daughter, the kids end up still getting exposed to the witnesses on a regular basis. Your presence in their lives, and I mean your active presence in their lives, is still going to protect them from some of the problems that those of us born in often deal with. It's definitely not going to protect them from everything, but it's better than having them be surrounded only by witnesses, as I was when I grew up, because I didn't have any balance. I didn't have any person in my early life to cause cognitive dissonance, and I think I would have really benefited from that. When they are teens, they will almost certainly leave on their own, especially if they've had you as a consistent voice of reason in their lives. So no matter what happens, continue to be there for them. Just keep trying. Just hang in there. And best of luck to you. So second set of questions comes from Bodybuilding Passion Wick, who says, when you awoke, how did your paradigm shift to focus and accomplish what you did successfully, getting through school, working in a field of your passion, etc.? Did you immediately start college and work? Were you thrown into the fire out of your parents' house upon disfellowshipping, given some help from worldly people or non-believing, non-witness family members to restart your life and begin adulthood? Were you naturally goal-oriented and organized, or was that a struggle to adapt, going from being raised with a Jehovah's Witness with those goals versus what worldly goals you accomplished? Was it a simple mental flip switch transformation? Those are great questions, actually, Wick. Can I call you Wick? I hope so, because I'm going to. No, it was not. There was nothing simple about it at all. I took a very circuitous route to sanity, and it was pretty crazy. I've always been fairly pragmatic by nature and highly anxious. So I have always been the type of person to put a lot of pressure on myself, in addition to the tremendous pressure being applied by my family and the witnesses in general. I mean, my sister was very, very rebellious, always. And my mother used to tell me that it was up to me to prove that my mother was a good parent. And I had to be perfect to counteract my sister's choices. Now, telling your kid something like that is pretty sick, but then so is my mother, so there you go. I have always also had an inability to accept things that I think are stupid. For example, male headship at all costs and the necessity of being submissive and dependent. I just watched that destroy my mother's life, and it made me determined not to follow suit, ever. But the problem was that there were literally no other options for me as a witness, and I think that I had that cognitive dissonance early on, so as a result I had significant problems, an eating disorder and depression and the infamous migraines, and ended up a half-assed suicide attempt at 14. But because of those problems, I was sent to a therapist fairly early when I was in high school, which ended up being very, very helpful for me. Now, I've already talked to you about my big aha moment in my high school English class before. There was an element of the light switch in that for sure, but I wasn't anywhere near being completely out even after that. I struggled for a long time with things like trying to find the true religion and trying to figure out how to support myself without having to be dependent. And like I said, things were pretty crazy for a few years. Basically, after high school, I went off to college, but I was really unprepared, and I couldn't handle everything and just crashed and burned in my second semester. So I moved back home, and then I moved out again into my own apartment, but it turned out to be a bad idea because the apartment was in the basement of someone else's house, and the landlord kept showing up in my apartment in the middle of the night and sometimes he would just be in his boxer shorts, just like standing there, and it was not cool. So I moved back into my mom's house, and that was when the elders were able to coerce me into attending my judicial committee by threatening my mom. So after I got disfellowshipped, I was told that I could not continue to live there at my mom's house unless I was working toward reinstatement. And so I had to figure out what to do because I was not going back under any circumstances. So I made some pretty spectacularly bad choices in that time in my life, but I'm going to spare you the details of that. So I'll spare us both the details of that. Anyway, for a while, I was a case study in bad judgment, really, because I was very attractive and very naive and very stubborn. And I was used to having this big family. All of that was suddenly gone. And I felt like nobody in the world actually loved me. And I was kind of ripe for being victimized. I had many times where I was taken advantage of by people that I thought were friends. There were several very dangerous situations that happened that I was very lucky to have come out of. So there was no family on the outside, and yeah, it was pretty crazy. So I had a series of bad roommates, and then I moved in with my ex-husband and his parents, and eventually we got married when I was 23, which was a massive mistake that ended in a nasty divorce 4 years later. He was in the Army, and he went to college on the GI Bill. Well, this was cool because once we were married, this allowed me to go to school too because I got Pell Grants. And so we were both able to pay our tuition and go. So we finished our AA degrees together, and then we went to university together. And he got a job in security at the university, so that particular school had a tuition program that we were both able to take advantage of, which was awesome. However, I was working 60 to 80-hour weeks on top of that to pay all of the bills while he just spent money and spent money and spent money and played video games and cheated and spent money. And so we actually split up during our last semester of university, of our undergrads. So graduation was really awkward because we had to sit next to each other. Anyway, when we divorced, he actually did his best to ruin me financially. But by that time, I actually had the skills that I needed to not only overcome the massive debt, but also to navigate relationships and set boundaries pretty well. So I went back to therapy and learned that in order to control the issues I was having, like the anxiety, I had to figure out what I could do personally to improve my situation and take control of that. I learned a lot of very valuable lessons in therapy, like how to say no and how to stop black and white thinking. And so I really highly recommend a good therapist to any and all former Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, we really need it because even if you were only in for a while, it didn't really get to you, it still did. It's still in there, and just take my advice and go see a therapist. After I finished my undergrad and my first marriage, I started seriously job hunting and trying to find a real job. I was living pretty literally hand to mouth, existing off free side salads at the restaurant where I was waiting tables. I tried to move to Florida with my sister, but that was a huge failure because as much as I love her, we can't live together. We're way too different to be able to live together. I went back to South Carolina where I found myself homeless because I had no job and nowhere to go. My mom had moved away by that point, and even if she had still lived in town, I was not willing to go seek reinstatement or go back to the Kingdom Hall, so that was out. You know who actually came through for me? My manager at the restaurant, who ended up being a very dear friend, and he and his wife at the time let me crash on their couch when he found out that I was actually sleeping in my car, and he gave me my job back. And within a week, I had rented a crappy little apartment, and I was on my way. And shortly after that, I got my first real job at Clemson University as a grant coordinator. And I had a pretty low but respectable salary and benefits and all that good stuff. And I started adulting. It was great. that job was a flashpoint for me because I realized I was so good at it. And it gave me this confidence that I needed. So within 4 years there, I was the director of the department. And then I continued going to therapy, and Les and I moved in together. And then the year we got married, I started working on my master's degree at Clemson. But I would say that even though I formally left the witnesses or was disfellowshipped in 97, I mean, I had not been to meetings before that, but I didn't feel completely free of them until about 2004 or 2005. So basically, it took me 8 years to get my head straight. And I realize now that I was very, very, very lucky. Those first 5 or 10 years out are really hard, even if you know that you don't believe anymore. I mean, I compare it to being a newborn baby. You have to learn everything. But it's actually worse than being a newborn because as a new ex-Jehovah's Witness, you actually think that you know a lot more than you do. Or at least I did. But as far as paradigm shift, I think it came to me in waves. First, the idea that I did not understand the world at all. And then the idea that if I didn't finish my education, then I would be stuck in a dead-end job forever. And just like I would have had I stayed a witness. And I would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I would become what they used to say that all apostates or all disfellowshipped people who didn't come back were. And I wasn't okay with that. So, and also, while I could make a good side hustle out of singing in bands, I really wasn't talented enough to do it for a living. So I kind of had to get with it and get a real job. Other paradigm shift type things that happened, the realization that religion had absolutely nothing positive in it for me and that I needed to focus my attentions elsewhere. But finally, acceptance that life is just life. And there's not an epic battle between good and evil. There's no good side and bad side. It's a lot more complicated than that. Our time is limited here. It's up to us to make the best of what we have. Kindness and love are always the best answer, and other people's opinions don't really matter all that much. So, I'm not sure if I actually completely answered the question, but here we are. And that's it for this episode of Ask Sister Pfister. Leave your questions for next time in the comments. Harrison, what would you like to say?
I just like to say on the snack.